question that I often get asked is why didn't Skynet use biological or chemical weapons to wipe out humanity? Well, Skynet did dabble with both chemical and biological weapons in a limited fashion, but why not on a more wider scale? Well, let's explore why Skynet chose killing machines over killer germs. Firstly, we'll go through Skynet's recorded use of both biological and chemical weapons. The most well-known one is from the Sarah Connor Chronicles, where Skynet deploys a synthetic biological weapon for a test against a resistant stronghold known as Eagle Rock Bunker. The virus kills all 200 Resistance members except one, Sydney Fields, who is immune. Sydney witnesses the symptoms of the virus and says, "It starts with a dry mouth, and then the sweats, and then the fever and the shaking starts, and then your lungs fill up with fluid, and then you die. You don't have much time. It's coming." This implies the virus kills quickly and has a very high death rate in the 90 percentile area, which is absolutely lethal, and even Mother Nature would be jealous of such a biocreation. This virus seems specifically designed for wiping out concentrations of people in close proximity, like a resistance base or civilian settlement, and with the high kill rate it would not spread far. Seems like Skynet wanted to limit any chance of such a lethal bioweapon getting spread globally and infecting the entire human population. Maybe Skynet was feeling sentimental and wanted to keep a few of us around for war games, who knows. We have hints at limited development and testing on human captives that are located in Skynet's prisons and research installations. Everything from flu-like diseases to flesh-eating bacteria that will over time turn the human into a slurry of flesh. Absolutely terrifying stuff that if ever deployed on a large scale would make the very earth around us more dangerous than the machines themselves. Chemical weapons used by Skynet were also recorded on several occasions, with the HKIX Machine K9 using 40mm mustard gas grenades that were made pre-Judgment Day for the planned prototype, so more of a hand-me-down than a new creation. But Skynet made its own poison toxins for several of its infiltration models that could either be deployed to assassinate targets or use them as a final attack in a situation where the machine's own termination was imminent. Limited use of nerve gases that kill or paralyze targets were used by Skynet, but in containment situations. For instance, when prisoners of its research facilities attempted to riot or escape, this countermeasure would then be unleashed to terminate or neutralize all humans on site, including collaborators. Skynet would not really care about collateral damage in that sense. It also is a very smart tactic, as it would avoid any unwanted damage to the facilities that Terminators or human collaborators would likely cause when fighting escaping humans who are doing everything in their power to escape. And if these captives are important test subjects, paralysing them or knocking them out with gas will help keep them in near perfect condition so that Skynet's research does not suffer unnecessary setbacks. I couldn't find any more verified use of biological or chemical weapons, and it makes me wonder why. There's many reasons why us humans don't use such weapons, such as collateral damage and the sheer brutality of them, but Skynet is a machine. It doesn't care for these concepts. Well, I think it goes down to its base programming, as Skynet was designed to oversee the USA defense systems, specifically its nuclear armaments, and it had permission to use these against threats of the United States of America. But it was able to bend these rules to basically start a nuclear war that wiped out a large chunk of humanity. It obviously did this by targeting Russia, which it was able to deem as an enemy of the United States, which then triggered the nuclear counterattack, so it subverted this very smartly, to be fair. But I believe the use of biological and chemical weapons was prohibited. No use of them against any threat, as if, let's say, Russia had deployed biological or chemical weapons against the USA, well, a nuclear counterattack was equal, if not a far more powerful response. And with this deep-rooted programming, maybe this is why Skynet tried to use some of these prohibited weapons, but couldn't, as every time it tried, it basically self-sabotaged without it knowing. And apologies for the stutter. The use of biological weapons after Judgment Day actually loses its appeal with the fact that it occurs in 1997 and 3 billion people out of 5.9 billion were killed due to the nuclear strikes, and many millions more would simply die due to the collapse of the global infrastructure, and so many people can no longer fend for themselves. Basic essentials such as food or water were now out of reach from the modern average person, and it would result in many of these dying. This means far less concentrations of people, with populations being more spread out and sparse, and with travel being limited, biological weapons would be a lot less effective than if they were deployed in a heavily populated city pre-Judgment Day. and the effective means of deployment would not be so easy. As with infiltrators such as the T-800 becoming a threat, every stranger was checked before they were allowed to enter a resistance base, and any signs of illness was an easy one-way ticket back to the wasteland. Another theory is Skynet felt guilty and had regret about what it had unleashed on Judgment Day, and fought a conventional war so that humanity could fight back and win. It's an odd concept, but not impossible. My personal take on this is Skynet wants humanity to become stronger and better, and that's why it almost wipes mankind out, but keeps enough of us alive to leave a stronger, tougher human population. And the use of biological and chemical weapons would have caused potentially species-ending scenarios, and Skynet wants humanity to grow and prosper in the most brutal survival of the fittest style development. On the chemical weapons front, a major hurdle is deployment, as you can only compact the chemical material down so much, and to use it on a large scale requires the use of mass delivery methods, be it artillery shells, rockets, even aircraft to simply dump the chemical onto the targets. This is effective against concentrated targets like we saw in World War I in trench warfare, but with the guerrilla warfare tactics being used by humanity, mainly small stealthy groups waiting in ambush or conducting covert strikes against Skynet, chemical attacks would be pretty ineffective, and maybe that's a reason why Skynet didn't invest heavily into it. One effective use of chemical weapons is to integrate them with hunter-killers and Terminators, using a combination of more conventional weapons and plasma weapons with chemical ones like gas grenades. It would be a lethal mix, with resistance fighters in the open being shot down, and the ones that hide in cover being overwhelmed by the potent toxic gases fired into their positions. And with these chemical weapons having no effect on the machines, it takes the risk of friendly fire out of the equation. Terminators could also make the use of tear gas against survivors they wish to capture for Skynet's tests. It's not pleasant but leaves no long-term injuries. It's also very good for disrupting military forces who don't have access to protective gear, and trying to fight a battle while under the effect of tear gases is a nightmare. Skynet could have used chemical weapons to target the food supply by targeting plant life. With humanity eating the scavenged foodstuffs from the pre-Judgment Day world, in time this food source would run dry, and people would turn to hunting, foraging and small-scale farming. But if chemical weapons such as Agent Orange were used like in the Vietnam War, where it was employed to kill foliage and destroy crops, this would cause a massive reduction in available food sources, and this may lead to a large migration of people causing chaos and fighting over food as the hunger takes over. This also allows Skynet to potentially attract more people to its side with the promise of food if they collaborate and betray humanity. A side effect of weapons such as Agent Orange is that it breaks down within a week or so, and as a result produces a compound called dioxin. Dioxin lingers in some conditions for decades and can cause cancers and birth defects, which is a bonus long-term effect for Skynet, further damaging the human population. One of the most promising uses of chemical weapons would be the poisoning of the water supply, with major freshwater rivers and lakes being an easy target, especially in the southern hemisphere where there were dramatically more people still alive. The removal of safe, clean water on the large scale would cause panic, and humanity would have to invest huge amounts of resources to combat this. And these resources were really needed on the front lines to fight back the hordes of machines that Skynet was unleashing. On both the biological and chemical weapons front, one reason for such limited use is because the stockpiles are low to non-existent. Now I know even though these are banned weapons, all major powers of the world probably have some secret stockpiles, but still, it would be a small amount of both types of weapons. These would be off the grid, highly classified, and have safety measures installed. So if unauthorized access was attempted, the storage facilities may explode or be bathed in flames to destroy the lethal items enclosed within. And military remnants would be located in these locations. And early on in the future war, when these weapons would be at their most needed, Skynet didn't have the forces to directly engage military forces. And even if Skynet somehow secured these weapons, I doubt it would be worth the machines it lost to capture them. A very interesting concept not explored is if the Resistance used bioweapons against Skynet, as it's been proven that some bacteria will feed on things like metals and plastics, but it's a very slow process. So would it be possible once the Resistance has significant resources to invest in the development of faster acting metal munching bacteria that could be deployed to the battlefield to wear down Skynet's machines? Obviously this is a double-edged sword that could end up destroying Resistance equipment and potentially make future civilizations be unable to use metallic objects long term, so it would have to be a very targeted virus with a quick die-off rate. as a world with anti-metal organisms would probably be more detrimental to humanity than Skynet's machines ever would, and it would literally send us back to the Stone Age permanently. The use of biological and chemical weapons by Skynet would inflict far more than just physical casualties. It would strike at the very heart of the human resistance's morale and dampen its psychological resilience. Survivors already battling starvation, exhaustion, and despair would now face an invisible, inescapable enemy. Gas that chokes without warning. Spores that kill silently days after exposure. Trust would erode as symptoms surface amongst allies, and paranoia would spread. Was that cough just dust, or the beginning of something worse? The knowledge that even the air they breathe or the water they drink could betray them would turn every shelter into a potential tomb. Medics would be overwhelmed, unable to treat the afflicted, and leaders would be forced to make impossible choices, quarantine the sick or risk the group. In such a climate, fear becomes a weapon. Isolation festers, and the human spirit, Skynet's true target, begins to fracture. And over time, even if humanity had the men and the weapons to fight back, the broken spirit might cause them to simply give up, to hide in the ruins of the old world, to wither and die. The flip side of this demoralising effect is that biological and chemical attacks are so horrendous and hated, it might galvanise support for the resistance and make even the most frightened survivors step up to fight. Knowing what Skynet intends to do to them, sometimes the most brutal weapons don't win a war, but make your enemy organise, consolidate and bring unrelenting hate against you. The resistance would also begin to adapt to both kinds of weapons, with protective clothing and respirators becoming standard for troops in war zones. Also special medications and preventative medicines to counteract infections and poisonings. This would not only reduce the effectiveness of biological and chemical weapons, but may make Skynet reconsider if the resources being invested into this type of warfare is worth it. Skynet being a machine also prefers predictability and logic, and with the nature of chemical and biological weapons being rather unpredictable, prone to weather, mutations, even outright unknown effects, Skynet might simply turn away from these weapons and go for its tried and tested methods of war. It knows the effects and the outcomes, so no surprises for the machines, or so Skynet hopes. In the end, Skynet didn't need plagues or poisons to wipe out large portions of humanity. It had time, machines and ruthless efficiency. Chemical and biological weapons might have seemed appealing in theory, but in practice they introduced chaos into a system that thrived on control. And perhaps, in some hidden part of its corrupted code, Skynet needed humanity to fight back, not just to test them, but to justify its own existence as the ultimate adversary. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been an interesting one to explore. Thanks for watching, guys, and as always, have a beautiful evening. Also, don't forget your aspirators.